Hey everyone, welcome to a special March Madness preview edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, let's start off as we always like to with what we think is the biggest bracket snub. And in my mind, it's the fact that none of us get to see Kareem Abdul-Jabbar slash Larry Nerd, and Indiana State is left out. I saw that they had a FBI as high as 29 in Kim Palm. I think they were in the 20s, and this is a team that was ranked in the top 25 for much of the season, and they lost in their conference championship game by I think like 3 points, and they're getting left out. And meanwhile, there's some other teams like Michigan State and Virginia that frankly weren't very good basketball teams, and they're getting in only based on what they've done in the past.
Yeah, that was one that stood out for sure. Indiana State, Sycamores. Also thought that a lot of people would have liked to have seen St. John's with
Yeah.
Rick Pitino. I would have been intrigued by that. I also noticed, they weren't necessarily snubbed, but the Mountain West Conference got very undervalued. They got 6 teams in the tournament, but they had like 2 teams that ended up in the first 4. And you would think after last year with San Diego State that narrative would have changed.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of things, like a lot of the big time prognosticators and pundits have been talking about how good Mountain West basketball is this year, and that those could be like a lot of good upset trendy picks is to go with Mountain West teams.
Yes, yes. But at the end of the day, as far as I think the snubs, it was more glaring this year because you had those bid stillers at the last second. You had at least 4 or 5 teams that would not have made the tournament. Teams like Oregon, for instance, that just stole bids at the last second.
Yeah, that's true. And Dana Altman, that's all. He's a great coach who seems to always get there. He kind of follows the Tom Izzo model where you don't really think about Oregon for pretty much the entire season, and they'll go on and they'll win the Pac-12 tournament, or they'll barely get in, and they'll make a deep run in the tournament. It's pretty standard for him.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So they're a dangerous team too.
Yeah, you made a good point about St. John's. The Big East in general got really snubbed. You think about UConn after winning the national championship the way they did, so completely and so dominantly. You would think that the Big East would get couple extra bids this year from showing how good they were. Especially think about last season. I think UConn was fourth in the Big East, and they made the kind of run they did in the tournament. And this year, you ended up getting I think 3 Big East teams in. You've got
Yeah,
UConn, Marquette,
and
and
Creighton.
Creighton, and that's it. And
Yeah, yeah,
you didn't get St. John's in, you didn't get Seton Hall in. And I thought Seton Hall would have been really compelling with them having the St. Peter's coach now. And then Providence doesn't get in either. And these are all teams that I think they're much better than the teams that we saw out of the Big Ten that got in.
yeah, yeah. I was surprised by that. I thought that everybody would be higher on the Big East Conference as a whole. And speaking of the former St. Peter's coach, of course, his former team, St. Peter's, made the tournament, winning their conference tournament. Another one of those teams that got a bid, and they will of course play Tennessee in the first round.
I know, like that was one that I definitely thought about as an upset just because of what the Peacocks did, peacocking their way all the way to the Elite Eight. What was that, 3 years ago?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, they got through teams like Purdue in the process.
Mm-hmm. And I think Kentucky too.
Yes, yes.
Um, but yeah, those are it. And then there were some teams that I thought really got bad seeding. I thought Auburn maybe got the biggest snub of all when it came to seeding. When you look at the fact that in Ken Palm they're a top four team, and the basketball index they're a top five team. They were completely dominant in the SEC tournament, winning their second one in 5 years under Bruce Pearl. And they went into the SEC tournament as a 4 seed. And after doing everything they did, after not having a single game where they won by less than 7 points, and especially beating a really hot Florida team the way they did at the end, they're not only just a 4 seed, they're the final 4 seed, and they have to be in UConn's division. That was pretty disrespectful.
Yeah, you don't do them any favors by sending them to Spokane. And if they win out there, they'll play in the East Finals against UConn in Sweet 16, and they'll probably send them somewhere in the East, like New York or New Jersey. So it'd be like a lot of traveling. So yeah, very disrespectful there. But as a whole, Dan, like starting with the East region, I think it's just a travesty. All the teams that they put together in this region. Like I don't understand how UConn, as the number one seed, quite frankly, gets rewarded with this just gauntlet of teams. I mean, you put UConn in there with Iowa State, a team that a lot of people thought could make an argument for a one seed. Then
Mhm.
you put Florida Atlantic in there as their second round opponent, a team in the Final Four last year. You put San Diego State in there, the national runner up last year. You talked about Auburn, and you put an Illinois team that's as dangerous as anybody. I
Mhm.
think this is an absolute travesty on the committee, putting 4 or 5 teams that I think are Final Four worthy in the same region. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense that you have the number one overall seed that's an unquestioned one who has to take on all these great teams. I mean, I think there's like three of the top five teams in Kimpom are all in the same region.
Yeah, I mean, you would think Purdue was the number one seed with the draw they got. I mean, they got a really manageable draw, quite frankly, looking at the teams ahead of them.
Yeah, I kind of think that they just really want to see Zach Edey make a Final Four, so they're trying to help him out.
Yes, there's no other explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrible. Well, let's start in that region, Joe. UConn, obviously, they got a first round matchup against Stetson, which I think this is like the first time that Stetson's ever been to an NCAA tournament. And that's great, but you got to like UConn in that one and pretty big.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Stetson's stay in the March Madness for the first time would be a very long, extended stay, but you definitely, great for their program to make it. But then, if FAU can get past Northwestern, I think that's a very intriguing matchup with Jonell Davis, some of the other players that are coming back from FAU, getting a chance to play UConn after they almost played them last year in the championship game.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, I definitely like FAU. John L. Davis was so clutch at the end of games last year. He showed it again in their conference tournament. I mean, that was a really tight win that they had to get into the NCAA tournament. Um, and I like them a lot. The 5-12 one in this one is fascinating to me because UAB is one of the hottest teams in America. I think that Andy Kennedy has done a great job in going home where he played basketball for Gene Bartow. And that's a really fascinating 5-12 to me between San Diego State and UAB. And what's interesting, you talked about Auburn getting sent out to Spokane. All of the Alabama teams got sent out to
Yeah.
Spokane. UAB, Auburn, and Alabama. It was like they didn't want any Alabama State fans to be able to watch basketball.
It seems that way. I mean, that's definitely a disservice, to the fans and the travel aspect. Don't understand that at all. But San Diego State, if they can get past UAB, I mean, they're a formidable team. I don't think they're as good as they were last year, but they have a player they didn't really have last year, Jadon Ladie, who's a 20+ per game scorer. Of course, they return Lamont Butler and Darion Trammell. Those were two stalwarts from last year's starting five. So I think they'll probably end up losing to Auburn, but again, this is a team that if they were seeded elsewhere in the tournament could absolutely have the talent to make a deep run.
Yeah, they definitely got put no favors with the difficult 12 seed to begin with, and with the hottest team in America probably right now in Auburn as their next round matchup.
Yes.
Going to the next one, Auburn and Yale. Auburn's going to win this game hands down because of what they have on the inside. Ivy League teams tend to be a lot of 3-point shooting. They don't really go up very well against teams that have very physical inside presences like Auburn does, which Auburn may be the best in the country this year when it comes to inside. So I don't see that as being much of a matchup. If it had been Princeton, I would have said there'd be more of a chance of, at least of being close, but I see this one as runaway.
Yeah, I mean, you saw Yale narrowly escape Brown in the championship game for the conference. I mean, really, Brown should have won that game.
Yeah, they did. I mean, what they had like a tip in at the last second to get in.
Yeah, they were down by 6 with like 30 seconds to go.
Uh, Joe, moving down in this region, you got BYU taking on Duquesne. This is an interesting matchup because Duquesne is making their first tournament run since 1977. So there's going to be a lot of motivation there. But BYU is just, as usual, they're a scoring machine. They've done a good job in their first season in a very difficult Big 12, with the Big 12 and the SEC being the two best conferences. I like BYU in this matchup, although I think Duquesne's going to play inspired basketball.
Yeah, traditionally BYU always has good guard play, and I think that their experience going through and surviving the Big 12 conference this year and still having a pretty good record, I think that that makes them battle tested to win this matchup.
Yeah. The next one, the 3-14 matchup with Illinois and Morehead State. I think for a lot of the season, Illinois was outside of Purdue the second best team in the Big Ten. They of course won the Big Ten tournament, have a lot of momentum right now. I really like Illinois' style of basketball. Like they actually are pretty high tempo and score a lot of points with actually very little defense. So it makes them a little bit atypical for Big Ten. And they've been, pretty good the last few years. And I know that Illinois, I think they went out early the last couple years in the tournament. So I think they're due to win a game or two at least.
Illinois is a very dangerous team. Fresh off the Big Ten tournament title, Brad Underwood's done a really good job there. I would say that this is a team that I have them going to the Elite Eight and losing to
Oh, wow.
UConn, but I think this is a team that if you're looking for a little bit of an outlier who could actually make it to the Final Four, even cut down the nets, I mean, this is your team. They've got one of the best backcourts in the country.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that is what you like to look for is guard play in the tournament, and Illinois definitely has that. Got an interesting 7-10 matchup. Washington State was a top 25 team for a lot of the season. They've had very limited appearances in the NCAA tournament and success. I think the best they've ever done is they made one Sweet 16, something like 6 or 7 tournament appearances overall. Of course, this is the last chance that they'll get to play in the Pac 12, which, for football, that's upsetting, but for basketball, not so much because the Mountain West is turning into a good basketball league. So they might actually become a better basketball program. Taking on Drake, who I would say they're one of the stalwarts of mid majors. They don't have the quite the cachet that you get with Gonzaga or Wichita State or VCU or any of that. But whatever the next rung is of mid majors, I would put Drake in there.
Yeah, Drake is a team that could really make some noise in this tournament. I like them to win this game. They won, I think, 29 games during the regular season. I think they're very dangerous. Washington State really just doesn't have any tournament experience. Kind of surprising. I heard somebody say during the selection show, it kind of floored me that this team has not been to the NCAA tournament in 16 years since 2008. Put that into perspective. Klay Thompson, who's been in the NBA for 13 years with the Warriors, never made it to the NCAA tournament. So here this team is finally in there, but I think that Drake will get past it.
Yeah, I like Drake in this matchup too. I think that's a solid 10/7 pick. Joe, going to the very bottom of this bracket, Iowa State and South Dakota State. If this were football, I would say maybe South Dakota State had a chance to win it, but Iowa State's a very solid basketball team, and they're one that I got going to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, they're really good. Very good defensive team. Don't really have that standout score, but I think they can easily make it to the Sweet 16.
Definitely. Um, Joe, let's go ahead and what we can do now is we can at least go through the Sweet 16 uh, to this bracket, stay right there. I like Iowa State to beat Iowa State and to beat Drake in a 10-2 matchup.
Yeah, I've got Iowa State as well there.
I like Illinois, but I'm pretty high on BYU, so I've actually got an upset here in the second round with BYU over Illinois. I think it'll be a really great game, but I like the guard play from BYU and the fact that they've been more battle tested. I'm just not a huge believer in Big Ten basketball this year.
I'm going Illinois here. I told you about their talent, and I think they'll be able to win this. But I could see BYU, giving them everything they want.
Joe, we got different teams. I had UAB pulling the upset over San Diego State, but I've got Auburn going over UAB and Auburn making the Sweet 16. And I would assume you probably got Auburn over San Diego State in your second round matchup.
Yeah, Auburn just a little more depth, I think, than San Diego State.
Yeah, and I think that Auburn can play defensive ball and still win games. I think they got more scoring ability than what San Diego State has.
Yeah, SDSU, their offense can be stagnant at times.
Yeah. Joe, in a rematch of last year's Final Four game. Well, actually, no, that was FAU played San Diego State, but in the
It
two
could have
teams,
happened.
it could have happened. In two teams that played in the Final Four, I got UConn beating FAU to make it to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I think FAU, plays inspired basketball, but you can't, look past UConn.
No, UConn is a force this year. Moving down to the next bracket in the West bracket, This is the one that's got the weakest number one seed in North Carolina, at least according to the rankings. Uh, and I like North Carolina over Howard and Wagner. While they may not have had, the season that some of the other number ones did, I really like this North Carolina team with the depth of having RJ Davis and Armando Bacot, who played a national championship game 2 years ago and who stayed around. I mean, they're both fifth year seniors to have a chance for one more go at, and I think they're going to make a really deep run. I actually have them in the Final Four.
Yeah, I really think they've got a good chance. And, I don't think they should be disqualified because, the rest of their conference has not been as good.
No, they're getting punished for sure by the fact that the ACC for the last couple years has been down. Although what's interesting, Joe, is while the ACC has been down, all these years they've been down, they've gotten at least one Final Four team. They had Miami last year. They had North Carolina the year before that. Well, they had North Carolina and Duke the year before that when they only got, I think, three or four teams in. So while the ACC not as much depth in it, they're still pretty good and top heavy.
They are. And, UNC beat, teams like Tennessee during the regular season. So, yeah, I think that this is a legitimate threat, this team.
Joe, in an interesting 8-9 matchup, the MSUs. I saw a lot of jokes on online that if you pick MSU in this game, you're going to win on your bracket. I like Mississippi State over Michigan State. Yet again, I think the Big Ten is maybe the worst of the Power Five conferences this year outside of the Pac-12. And I'm just not a big believer in them. I kind of think that Michigan State shouldn't have made this tournament. And meanwhile, Mississippi State showed a lot. I mean, they're the only team that lost to Auburn by less than 10 points that Auburn beat. So they've got that moniker this year. And they absolutely, I'm sure if you're a Mississippi State fan, you'd rather hear this stat, just destroyed Tennessee in the SEC championship, the SEC tournament, which I couldn't believe. I mean, that was the most shocking result of the entire tournament was the way that Mississippi State just waylaid Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't sure if they were going to make the NCAA tournament. And then not only did they make it, they end up as an 8 seed after that win. And, Josh Hubbard, one of the most explosive freshman guards in the country. But I'm going Michigan State in this game because of Tom Izzo, because of his experience in the tournament. Always, it seems like when you least expect them to make a deep run, they do it. They maybe pull like a UCLA from a couple of years ago and make a deep run. And I also think that Tyson Walker is a guard that may not get enough attention. And I think that he's a really good scorer in this game.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan State, I say they're going to get on the first round, but they could always make a Final Four run because that's just the way that Izzo is.
Just like one or the other, like not just like, drastic one way.
It's either they go out in the first four or in the very first game. Sometimes they get upset heavily, like when Middle Tennessee State beat them, or they
Yes,
go on a Final Four run when they're like a 12 seed.
exactly.
Yeah. So the next one, speaking of 512s, St. Mary's Grand Canyon is very interesting to me because Grand Canyon beat some really good teams this year. In the non-conference, and they beat UAB. There's a couple other like big time teams that they beat because I was looking it up. And meanwhile, St. Mary's, I feel like the West Coast Conference this year isn't what it was in the past. Gonzaga's down. St. Mary's not quite as good as they've been. And I kind of like the upset here. I'm taking Grand Canyon as a 12 over a 5 here.
I'm going St. Mary's. I was tempted to go Grand Canyon, but I do believe that this is a moment for St. Mary's with, their longtime head coach, Randy Bennett, winning the conference regular season and tournament title outright. I kind of feel like this is his moment to make a deep run. And they've got, some really good players like Mahaney and Saxon, got good guard play. They can rebound. And so I think that St. Mary's is a very formidable team in this tournament.
Okay. Well, I've kind of heard it go both ways. A lot of people picking Grand Canyon to win, and the ones that don't are picking St. Mary's to go on a deep run, like Elite Eight level run.
Yeah, they can easily do it. I have them in the Sweet 16.
Okay. Uh, Joe, next we have a 4-13 matchup in Alabama and Charleston. I think this is a really bad matchup for Alabama. Charleston has been the tournament a whole lot lately. This Bama team is absolutely reeling. They've lost 5 of their last 6 games. In my mind, by far the worst number 4 seed. I don't know how they got a 4 seed based on the way they ended the season. Not just losing games, but losing really badly. I mean, Florida beat them by 20 plus points twice in the last couple weeks. I think the only game that Bama won in the SEC the last 2 weeks of the season was they barely edged out Arkansas, who was, the most underachieving team of all the SEC this year. Uh, Charleston has got a hot coach who I've heard he's looking at maybe even getting the Louisville job. I look at Charleston I actually got them in the Sweet 16, so I like Charleston in this game.
Yeah, I mean, if they could get past Bama, they could make a run here. And it is weird seeing Bama as a 4 seed with the 21-11 record, because you see other teams like Northwestern, they're 21-11 and they're an 8 seed. So that is kind of odd to see that as a 4 seed. But I think that Marcus Sears plays well in this game. I like Alabama to at least win this one game.
Okay. Um, Joe, going down the line, we got an 11-6 matchup that's interesting. You're talking about this Mountain West Conference that's getting really hated on. New Mexico, that's a really good basketball team. They're slated they're an 11 seed, taking on Clemson, who is a 6 seed, who has a lot to prove after what happened last season where they didn't make the tournament. But, I think the ACC is not quite as good of a conference as the Mountain West this year. And I'm a believer in New Mexico basketball. I like New Mexico in this as an 11-6 upset.
Yeah, I went with them too. You have Jalen House, you got JT Toppin, you got Jamal Mashburn Jr. I mean, like that.
Wow.
I think that's going to be a fun team to watch.
That is. You got some name recognition there. So is Jamal Toppin Obi's brother?
Possibly, and Jalen House. I mean, let's say it. I think some of these guys are going to become household names at the end of this tournament.
Oh, nice one, Joe. All right, so the next one we have the Baylor Bears, the Baylor Baptist Bears taking on the Fighting Toothpaste. Baylor and Colgate. I know Colgate, I think it was a couple years ago, they did win a game in the NCAA tournament. And believe it or not, Colgate University, because I was making jokes about this, but I looked it up recently. It is affiliated with the toothpaste. I think the toothpaste owner
wow.
started Colgate University. Um,
Wow.
Unfortunately, they're going to get whitewashed in this game by Baylor. This is not quite the Scott Drew teams we've seen in the past. But Baylor's a good basketball team. They beat Auburn in the non-conference by 4 points. Of course, they're battle tested in the Big 12. Not the best of Baylor teams, but I still got them going to the Elite Eight.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is like if you're looking for a sleeper in this region. I talked about Illinois in the other one. I mean, this is the sleeper Baylor here. I mean, they can make it out of this region. I mean, this team's not as good as they've been, but they've got 2 players that are projected as NBA lottery picks, and so if those guys can live up to their potential, Scott Drew's experience, that they can make a run here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if Baylor makes the Final Four, I'm not shocked.
Right.
Joe, in a 10-7 matchup that's interesting, Dayton and Nevada. Dayton's a team that there's been times this year they're ranked in the top 25. I'm just not a big believer in Anthony Grant's style of basketball. I watched it for a long time at Alabama. It doesn't really match up that well in the tournament because they just don't have any offense. They never do. And Nevada's another one of these really good Mountain West teams. And I like Nevada in the upset here in the 10-7 upset.
I went Dayton, but it was kind of a coin flip game for me. It was really hard. I could be convinced either way, but I did give Dayton the slight edge.
Joe, and what I think is the most interesting 15-2 matchup, Arizona versus Long Beach State. Long Beach State may be the most interesting team in this entire tournament and a team that I'm really rooting for. They fired their coach before the conference tournament, and this is a coach who actually started the Gonzaga legacy. Before Mark Few got there, Mark Few was the assistant coach for the Long Beach State coach, and he got Gonzaga going in the right direction. And I guess, somehow he or another ended up in Long Beach State. But they fire him at the end of the regular season. He goes on and he wins the conference tournament, and now they're sitting there as a 15 seed. And Joe, I don't know that I necessarily believe this happening with them taking on Arizona, who's a good basketball team, albeit not from a great conference. I actually picked Long Beach State to win this in my only 15/2 because of the story. I just think the story is that epic.
Well, here's what adds to it. Tommy Lloyd, the Arizona head coach, of course, is a former Gonzaga assistant. Like he just, came to Arizona 2 or 3 years ago. And yeah, Dan Monson, he of course left Gonzaga after they made the Elite Eight in '99, took another job, I think Colorado or something like that. And then the rest is history for Mark Few. But here's what I want to say real quick about this. It is so obvious to me. I talked about the vast underseeding of some of these teams in the Yukon region. The committee just so deceptively, sneakily, or you can say blatantly, just picks these matchups for intriguing storylines. Like they don't really look at who the best teams are. You're obviously putting two former Gonzaga guys against each other to add to the storyline here. So I don't get that. I guess it makes for TV. It is a made for TV event. But at the end of the day, I do like Arizona in this game. I think Caleb Love, Omar Balla, to me, this is a tandem that could easily make it to the Final Four.
Well, definitely. They have the talent for it. Another reason I picked this 15-2 is because Arizona's got a history of going out early in the tournament, especially the last few years.
I think we're going to get, well, I jumped ahead, but I think we're going to end up getting a Caleb Love reunion matchup against UNC in the Elite Eight. That's what I got.
That would be something. I mean, I think that's what they're wanting.
Yes.
Joe, moving on into looking at this bracket in the second round, I've got Nevada over Long Beach State. So I've got Nevada making the Sweet 16, and I've got Baylor taking out New Mexico. So for a Baylor-Nevada Sweet 16 matchup.
I've got Baylor, Arizona in the Sweet 16.
And what is a crazy, and actually not the only one where I have this, I've got a 12-13 matchup with going up between Grand Canyon and Charleston, and I've got Charleston making the Sweet 16 to take on North Carolina, who is going to beat Mississippi State.
I've got St. Mary's, Bama, and then St. Mary's outlasting Alabama to take on UNC.
Okay. All right, Joe, moving over to the South region, Houston, heavy favorite in this is a 1 seed. I boldly predicted on the show, a couple years ago that I thought Houston would win a national championship under Ralph Sampson in the next 5 years. This is definitely one of the best chances they have as a 1 seed. So I like Houston in their first round matchup against Longwood.
Yeah, Houston, I like them as well. Obviously a very disappointing performance against Iowa State, but I think they got the right draw here where, they can kind of get going a little bit.
Definitely. Well, I mean, that was, they got brutalized in that championship game by Iowa State, but this is a good chance for them to rebound a little bit, pun intended.
Yeah.
The 8-9 matchup here, I think this is one of the more interesting 8-9s with Nebraska and A&M. Texas A&M to me is not the Buzz Williams teams that scares me like they've been in the past. They're not as good defensively. They don't really have any elite scorers. Nebraska, meanwhile, basically has like a college version of Jeremy Lin who was lighting people up. And I like the Cornhuskers here, even though I've been down on the Big Ten for the most part. This is a team that I actually do like a little bit. So I've got Nebraska winning this 8-9 matchup.
I like Texas A&M. The Nebraska story is cool, having Fred Hoiberg back in college, former Iowa State head coach. And I think Nebraska is trying for their first ever NCAA men's basketball tournament win. But I really like this Texas A&M team's potential. Wade Taylor, Garcia. This is my sleeper team. Like, I don't have them going further than the second round. I think they win this game. But in this region, Texas A&M is my sleeper team. If you're looking for an outlier who can make a deep run, I think that's the team.
Interesting. Well, that is what Buzz Williams has done in the past. Joe, continuing my disdain for the Big Ten this year, we got a 12-5 with James Madison in Wisconsin. I think James Madison won 30 games this year. They won a lot of really impressive games in the non-conference. Wisconsin doesn't score that much. I think the Big Ten, like I said, was vastly overrated. Wisconsin hasn't done anything to impress me that much. I got James Madison winning this one.
Yeah, I similarly went with James Madison. I think, anytime you get like these 30-plus win mid-major teams, you always feel like they're right for at least one upset.
Definitely. And Joe, moving on to a really fascinating 4-13 matchup with Duke and Vermont. Vermont's one that always seems to either win one in the NCAA tournament or they get close to doing it. A really tough 3-point shooting team. They've got that crazy kind of offense that's hard to guard against. I'm not a big believer in this Duke team. I mean, Filipowski's really good, but there's not a lot of star power to it. And I do feel like they've lost a little bit since Coach K left. They're not a bad program by any means, but it's just not to where it was. Like, North Carolina killed them both times they played them this year. I'm actually going to take Vermont in the upset here.
I was tempted to, but I did go with Duke. I think that Filipowski will do enough on the boards to get past this game, but I think JMU has a good chance to make it to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I actually got JMU in my 16. Uh, Moving down, Joe, in the 6-11 matchup, this is a really interesting one to me. NC State and Texas Tech. North Carolina State is fresh off a really impressive run through to win the ACC tournament. They were one of those bid stealing teams that you were talking about. Texas Tech is, of course, very battle tested coming from the Big 12. That just hasn't done a whole lot to really impress me. And, they don't have Chris Beard as the coach anymore. I'm taking the Wolfpack of NC State, who's a very hot basketball team, to get this first round win.
I went Texas Tech because I think that NC State, the emotional, effort and just like having to play 5 games in 5 days, I think that that will wear on them to an extent, and so I think that Texas Tech's able to win this game.
I mean, that sometimes happens. It goes one way or the other when you win the conference tournament. Moving down
Right.
to Kentucky and Oakland. I've heard a lot of people talking about how good this Oakland team is, but this Kentucky team is really coming on. They didn't have the best end of the season. I think they went 5 out of their last 7, but so much young talent on this team, including Big Z, who's been on the bench. I like Kentucky this one pretty handily.
Yeah, I really think this is set up. This region's set up very well for Kentucky to make a deeper run.
Yeah, I've actually got Kentucky making my Final Four.
But same here.
Joe, in the next round, we got Florida taking on either Boise State or Colorado. I'm a big fan of this Florida team. I know they lost one of their bigs in that game against Auburn, but Florida had really been kind of the hottest team in the SEC before Auburn took them out in that championship game. And I really like what they've been doing with Todd Golden as a first year head coach.
Because of that injury, I went with the winner of Colorado Boise State. I think
Yeah.
it's a good chance it's Colorado. Colorado's got really good, senior tandem of Simpson and Da Silva, and they've also got Cody Williams, who has been considered a top 5, top 10 pick in the draft. So I think this is a very dangerous team.
Okay. The last one we got Marquette taking on Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky is a team that has done good things in the tournament in the past, but this Marquette team is very good. They actually beat UConn during the regular season, I think, pretty handily. So I got Marquette definitely winning this first round matchup.
Yeah, if Marquette can get Tyler Kolek back healthy, I mean, they could make a deep runs, but I definitely think they win this game.
Joe, it may have been SEC bias and what I saw Florida do to Auburn during the regular season and the way they beat Alabama so handily twice in a row. I've actually got in Florida making my Sweet 16 and taking out Marquette.
Yeah, I really like this Florida team, but like I said, I have probably Colorado getting past them, and then I have Marquette, beating either Colorado or Boise State to get to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, Joe, and I've got an all SEC Sweet 16 matchup with Kentucky taking out NC State. So it's going to be Kentucky and Florida there for me.
Yeah, I've got Kentucky over Marquette there to the Elite Eight.
Uh, and Joe, I've got JMU, James Madison, making the Sweet 16. They're taking out Vermont, and they're going to take on Houston in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I've got Houston and JMU, and then Houston going on to face Kentucky.
All right, last bracket quickly. Purdue taking on either Montana State or Grambling. I know Purdue lost to a 16 seed last year, but that's why I can't possibly have them losing again this year. I think Zach Edey's going to be too much for who they take on, but I may have an upset in the next round for the Boilermakers.
Yeah, I like Purdue in that first round game.
Big on the Mountain West this year. I've got Utah State out of the Mountain West beating TCU in the 8-9 matchup.
I've got TCU with the tournament experience of Jamie Dixon playing Purdue.
Okay. Gonzaga and McNeese State, really fascinating 5-12 matchup. As I said, Gonzaga's underachieved by their standards this year. McNeese State, coached by a disgraced former LSU head coach, doing a great job in his first season. McNeese State beat a lot of really good teams. I like McNeese State in my upset here.
Yeah, I think McNeese wins it as well. That's tough for me. As Gonzaga being one of my favorite teams, but Gonzaga's just not as deep this year. With they've got Graham Ike, they've got Nimhard, but they really don't have a good rotation. Forces those guys to play too many minutes, and I think McNeese is the deeper team.
Yeah, I think so too. Joe, really fascinating 4-13 here. Sanford with Bucky Ball, Bucky Williams from up in Homewood, getting a coach a hometown team. He took Mountain Brook to multiple state championships in Birmingham. He's really got this team playing great at Sanford. I've got Sanford taking the upset over Kansas in the first round.
Yeah, I like Stanford as well. I don't trust this Kansas team. This kind of reminds me of the time Kansas 1 year under Bill Self. They lost to Bucknell in the first round in a 14-3, 4-13. I think this is similar.
I agree. Um, Going down, Oregon and South Carolina. I talked about it before. I don't trust South Carolina in the tournament. I think they're excited to be here. Dana Altman has never lost a first round game in the NCAA tournament. He's not going to here.
Yeah, I like Oregon as well. I know that you could make the argument they're similar to NC State, but I think Dana Altman's tournament experience allows them to be more prepared for this.
That's right. And then the rest of this one, I've got Creighton, I've got Virginia beating Texas, and I've got Tennessee.
Yeah, I like Creighton and Tennessee. I've actually got Creighton in my Final Four. I think they're the sleeper in this region. I think they've got the guard play and the experience from last year to make it to the Final Four for the first time for Greg McDermott.
Yeah, I've got Creighton in the Final Four also. And we will see you next week. Hopefully, we have a great first round of the NCAA tournament, which I expect. Follow us on Twitter and, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Jeff.